So it's really, there's this sense where the relationship between meaning, by meaning, I mean the sense of significance, right? The way things are connected to themselves and beyond themselves. And the more connection that which is connected to at more dimensions and levels and layers, the more meaningful that is. And, it's funny because as far as I can tell, the way that we've always experienced meaning is we talk about meaning in our lives really as deeply wedded to time. We say things like, that was the most meaningful time of my life. Or that moment changed everything for me. Or that was the most meaningless moment of my life. Or the most insignificant period of time. At least often anyways. Seems like there's a temporality to meaning, and there's a meaning to temporality. Yet, more and more, I think that we've come to understand time in a way that doesn't really account for that, right? I think we've come to understand time in the sense of just our common sense understanding of time anymore is really more like time is, it's kind of like a propulsion or a force of some kind, right? Maybe a purely objective force or subjective force. But it's kind of got this sense in which it's like, I don't know, something about nature, but in some sense, it's a time in which we are subjected to. It acts upon us. Yet, the sense in which time and significance, time and meaningfulness, meaning and time, has a quality of, in some way, there's a way where time holds us and we in turn behold it. And there's a way in which I can stand with time. And time in some sense holds me back as I hold it. And there can be this relation with time, right? But what is it? What happens though when we if we kick meaning out of time and we start to live in a time that doesn't really have any relation to us, and the way that we relate to it has no bearing on the way that it is, right? What happens if we if we look at it that way and we kick meaning out of the domain of time? Well, then it seems to me that it seems like we then have to find meaning in the circumstances of time, or in time. And time, in some sense, is just a thing that provides momentum and entropy to whatever's its timing, but does not support or account for or alter or is affected by our participation with it, right? Then it seems like meaning is delegated to the shape of our circumstances. And thus, if time, temporality, cannot be meaningful, then the circumstances in time need to be propelled. They need to be instigated. They need to be enforced, participated. In other words, you can start to realize, like, oh, this perhaps is why, or what supports, or the understanding upon which has it make sense that we do all these things, like, all these ideological wars and these kind of victim, self-righteous, perpetrator, rescuer dynamics. And we're, in some sense, there's a necessity to those things, and we can't seem to get out of them. And it's almost as if we can't get out of them, or we don't want to get out of them in some sense, right? Because it seems like the way that we experience meaning is this kind of tension release of these power dynamics, right? Or drama, essentially. And trauma is really interesting to think about, because it's if you've noticed, if you turn on the soap opera, and maybe turn on the soap opera is just to look at your own life and watch it, and you may find that you are the soap opera. But drama, in that soap opera sense of it, like the melodramatic sense of it, right? Not drama in the deep sense, in the way kind of Aristotle talked about it, but more in the shallow tension release, perpetuating itself sense. But all drama, right, is dramatic, attempting to get rid of the drama by being dramatic. That's what makes a drama, right? It's like, the reason why I'm yelling at you is so that you'll stop hurting me. Yet, of course, that hurts you, so therefore you then yell at me, and then we can keep the dynamic, or the sensation of meaning in play. Because if we don't, then time doesn't support it, really. It just will do like everything else does. It'll just kind of fade out into entropy, and then we will be in the abyss, is there lurking. Yet in seeing that, which is one of the things I often find anyways, is of an original sense of time, an original, authentic sense of meaning and time, really can come about through seeing the way in which I am inauthentic versus seeing with it. I can see it, and that there's something, it seems like there's something about the opening of seeing the drama or the addiction to the particular dynamics of elevated sensation, kind of keeping the abyss at bay. In seeing it, you're doing something else in that moment, I think. Or you're inviting, you're standing differently, or you're holding yourself differently in that relation when you can see your inauthenticities. There's like an opening there. An opening for probably something else. More original or something. And I think it precisely, maybe our way back to a sense of temporality that involves us. That we can, is a way that we can hold ourselves in and with time, and time in turn holds us in that relation, right? I think the way back there really doesn't have to do with foundations or even getting kind of like an understanding of time that can account for some way in which we can ground ourselves in more of a meaningful way. I think it's precisely in this abyss, right? In this loss of foundations, which strangely enough, kind of you can trace back to, I think as Heidegger really spells out, articulates really well, the way in which metaphysics sought to ground beings with being. And so giving beings a foundation in being, right, has being stand up and look out on something of this abyss, right? Paradox of that, right? Because if in some sense if being is all used up by beings and it's their foundations, well then beings stand up and they look out and all that's left is non-being in some sense. And this probably has a lot to do with the modern sense of technology and the will to will and all these different things, right? All these different ways of being dramatic. Yet I think there's another way of seeing this abyss. I think, receiving a hint from Miroslav Ponte, I think this non-foundational ontological sense of no foundation is actually a kind of depth. It opens up a depth that is a depth that can draw one in to deeply find themselves participating and gesturing out, drawing out this inexhaustible sense and a kind of the becomingness of a new way of making sense. And this, of course, right, goes all the way down, because this really starts to give a different place to language. Or you could say it affords language to be something other than just signs that point to other signs, i.e. only point out and articulate what is already known. Whereas if we open up to this foundationless depth dimension and let it breathe, and participate with its inexhaustibleness, then language, it seems, is now language gets to be something that draws out the depth and formations of new forms of intelligibility through a deep participation. Because now language isn't there to keep shoring up a foundation that gives us some kind of weird security or something. And now, in some sense, we're free to interweave, intertwined, co-articulate the emergence of sense in different forms of sense. And that this deep way of participation is a kind of meaningfulness, as I speak it here, that seems to be one in which is deeply implicit, and you can start to feel it drawing in a temporality that is deeply coupled with meaning. And so what would it look like, right? So like, what would it look like? How would the world occur, right? We'll call it a way of being. This demanding for foundations, but a listening for a depth that one comes to be in and through relation. So in some sense, there's me and you, there's myself and the world, there's you and I and thou. And you could say that we don't come to two. It's not me and you and we come to two, but yet we're never alone. You and I added together are not quite two, but yet we're never alone. And in some sense, I would imagine this way of being is a different way of, in some sense, being the Logos. The way that the Logos gathers and lays out, or lets lay. I like to think about the gathering showing that everything is. Yet in some sense, right, it's the logos is it's I think what I'm talking about we're leaving behind is in some senses we've been related to you could say the product of the logos, the order of the logos, in all of its categories and all of its presuppositions and all of its way, the order of it. Yet what I think I'm talking about is, by being the logos, is being the dynamic of gathering itself. The dynamic of gathering, letting show itself. And I think what that maybe looks like at an experiential level, maybe we could even we say a psychological level, I think that way of being allows one to experience more and more the world in an encounter. An openness to be encountered by this wave, by this event, by this tree, by this body, by this moment. To be encountered. Because the word encounter has this, it's got this simultaneous sense, right? Where on one level, to be encountered or to encounter something is simultaneously to recognize it, yet it beckoning to discover what is obscure about it at the same time. So it's simultaneously a recognizing and a beckoning to understand what is obscure. Thanks for allowing my voice to couple with your ear. I hope we're having a good time.